Present us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favor, and further us with thy continual help, that in all our works begun, continued, and ended in thee, we may glorify thy holy name, and finally, by thy mercy, attain everlasting life. Amen. Introduction of guests. I've got a couple introductions to start. Thanks for the leave, everyone. It's going to be extended. How's that? Thank you so much. Sitting on the floor on this side, I'd like to introduce behind the bar Mr. Nadeem Naz and his daughter Renina. I had the opportunity to meet both of them, but Renina in particular at a fundraiser to build schools in Pakistan, and I was there with the member for Regina Pasqua at the time. But Renina is 16 years old. She goes to Johnson Collegiate. She enjoys drawing and coloring and shopping and visiting with her school friends. And we had a great discussion in regards to my role, and it's a real honor to have you in this assembly, and this is your assembly. So could have all members join me in welcoming Renina to her assembly and her father, Nadeem. And while I'm on my feet, the summer tour schedule for the Saskatchewan Legislative Building has started, and tours of the building are offered every half hour from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. 7 days a week. They're available in French and English, and visitors from all over the world will be exploring provincial history and visiting our Legislative Assembly. Seated in the Speakers Gallery, please give a warm welcome to the Visitors Services Summer Team. And just give us a wave when I say your name. Ross Zimmerman, Ava Tomasevich, Anton Gunet, Cassie Bieriger, Shehe Kasset. They're accompanied by Kelly Liberate and Arnold McKenzie, Senior Information Officers, and Marianne Morgan, Program Coordinator and Supervisor. I'd like to extend a special appreciation to Marianne for efforts in keeping things running smoothly as the Interim Director of Visitor Services. Thank you, Marianne. Please join me in welcoming the Visitor Services team to their Legislative Assembly. I recognize the member for Regina Pasqua.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to join you and welcome a longtime friend of mine, Nadeem Naz, with his daughter Rania Naz. Mr. Speaker, Nadeem has been living in Regina since last 28 years, and since last 16 years, he has been volunteering in CJTR 91.3 FM community radio on Saturday from 1 to 2 o'clock. And Rania, his daughter, is here. Is a very strong girl and have many school friends. I ask all the members to join me, welcome them again in their legislature. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize a member for Regina Rosemont.
Thank you very much. I join with the Speaker and the member opposite to welcome these impressive leaders in our community to their assembly. And I also ask for leave for extended introduction.
For leave for an extended introduction, is leave granted? Recognize the member.
Mr. Speaker, to you and through you, seated in your gallery, it's a tremendous honor to welcome Anna Marriott to the Saskatchewan Legislative Assembly, all the way from Montreal, visiting here this week. I understand she spent a day working in a local independent business, that she visited 6 small towns, that she hiked Castle Butte down in the Big Muddy, that she supported many local breweries. Mr. Speaker, I understand she also chased a tornado while here as well. So I ask all members to welcome Anna here. And along with Anna, and the reason she's visiting her good friend, Alina Young. It's an honor to have Alina here. Alina is a small business owner here in Regina, Takeaway Gourmet, Mr. Speaker. She's also elected as the Vice President of the Saskatchewan School Boards Association, as a trustee with the Public school board. She served as an incredible candidate in Regina University, Mr. Speaker, for the NDP. And we'll be joining tonight with Alina, I think, at the India Pavilion at 7 o'clock. All are welcome. We'll be bartending, slinging some cold mango lassi, maybe some cold kingfishers as well. But I ask all members to welcome Alina and Anna to the Saskatchewan Assembly.
Here, here. Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to introduce to you and through you to all members of the Legislative Assembly a school group from St. Luke's School in Saskatoon. St. Luke's School is actually just down about 4 houses from where I used to live. These 36 grade 5 students are accompanied by their teachers, Carrie Karakachuk, Jeff Sagansky, and a number of parent chaperones. Maria Czech, Lauren Kaniski, Curtis Minkowitz, Lisa Thompson-Tkachuk, Michelle Wilfing, Shannon Hines, Fior Kasai, Noreen Mahoney, Amy Sturgeon, and Andrea Papish. Mr. Speaker, there's sort of a tradition here that the MLAs that are introducing students are obliged to buy them juice afterwards. And Mr. Speaker, of course, I'm going to do that. But there's always a lot of banter from the people behind that you should be buying ice cream as well. Well, Mr. Speaker, to those students, I would say this. There won't be ice cream today, but if they go on Friday to their school, we will be doing one of our neighborhood barbecues right outside their school, and they're welcome to come for hot dogs and fire truck rides and a bouncy castle. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to tell the members opposite, the money for this was raised through a turkey fundraiser. And Mr. Speaker, to them, all of their churches would welcome them on Friday.
Recognize the member for Regina Lakeview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my pleasure to introduce 2 guests seated in the East Gallery today. Mr. Speaker, two folks who I'm happy to count amongst as friends and as general rabble-rousers in all the best ways, Mr. Speaker. Seated in the East Gallery are Shirley Dixon and Abby Ulmer. I will have the opportunity to deliver a member's statement very shortly, recognizing some of the great work that Abby does in our community, but also wanted to recognize Shirley for her contributions in the community. And I'd invite all members to join me in welcoming them to their Legislative Assembly.
Here, here. Recognize the member for Moose Jaw North.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the West Gallery, there is a school group from Moose Jaw that's here. I'd like to welcome them. There's 23 grade 5 and 6 students from Westmount Elementary School. We can give us a wave if you like. That's great. It's always nice to have students come into the legislature and watch us. So I'd like to welcome here. We're going to be meeting a little. They're going to have a nice little tour. We'll meet them a little later for a picture and some questions. So along with them is their teacher, Debbie Taylor French, and chaperones Jessica Reed, Lynn Bowren, Megan Moore, Megan Fortin, Tina Dosh, and Leah Resnick. So I'd like everyone to welcome them to the Legislative Assembly, and we'll talk to them later.
Here, here.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join the member from Moose Jaw North in welcoming the students from my hometown of Moose Jaw, and a particular hello to Debbie Taylor French. Debbie's parents, Ray and Judy Taylor, are my parents' next-door neighbors on 2nd Avenue in Moose Jaw, and that's been a great friendship between our families, and great to see Debbie here. I also want to mention a couple other people who are in the building today, in the gallery today. One of them has stepped out. She was here momentarily and has disappeared, but I'm going to say something about her anyway. Melissa Bendig has been our Director of Issues Management for a good while now, has been with our office for over 3 years. She's moving on to work with the Alberta Ministry of Energy, and we're really going to miss her work. We also have in the gallery today Deb McDonald, who is our Interim Chief of Staff, who's done a terrific job helping us to be such an effective opposition this term. And I also want to recognize Mitch Bonikoski, who's our incoming Director of Issues Management. Brilliant young man, been working with us for a long time. does always rock a very fine haircut, as Trent points out. And just would like to ask the members welcome to join me in welcoming them to their assembly and thanking them for their work.
Recognize the member for Kelvington-Wadena.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you to all members of the legislature, it's my pleasure and honor to welcome my wife to the legislature today, the mother of three wonderful children and a very patient lady who has put up with me for 41 years. Mr. Speaker, in your gallery, please welcome my wife Giselle to her legislative assembly.
Reading and receiving petitions.
Statements by members.
That's pretty. No petitions. No petitions.
No petitions on the last day.
Yeah, no petitions on the last day of the spring sitting. Statements by members. I recognize the member for Saskatoon Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, great news. June is Pride season here in Saskatchewan, and communities from Estevan to La Loche are proudly celebrating sexual diversity. I was especially delighted to bring a message of support to the Pride flag raising in Estevan this past Monday. This year's theme is True Colors, something pretty special when we think of the rainbow flag and what it means in our communities for hope, respect, and pride. Mr. Speaker, I was particularly pleased to note last week's human rights ruling, a significant first in Canada that allows people of all ages to change or remove their gender marker on their birth certificates. Mr. Speaker, I want to congratulate two brave young people, Ren and Jordan, who led this fight for human rights and gender diversity. Judge Krogan, in her landmark ruling, insightfully said, referring to the Sask Human Rights Code, and I quote, "The code is essential to the health and strength to our community. Section 3 captures the objects of the code, which include the recognition of the inherent dignity and equal, inalienable rights of persons. The code also supports the advancement of public policy that aims to eliminate discrimination." Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to come out and support our queer community, our LGBTQ two-spirited friends, families, and neighborhoods. Take some time to attend a flag raising, a pride parade, even attend a drag queen show. Have some fun, show your true colors. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Cannington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Tuesday, I had the privilege to attend and speak at the funeral of Tony Day. Tony was born in Admiral, Saskatchewan in 1932 and moved to Cardiff in 1955. In 1960, he married Vi Bayless, and from that time on, it was known as Tony and Vi because they were a true partnership. They had 4 children, 2 daughters, 2 sons, and the company they built, Mr. Speaker, was Fast Trucking, along with a number of other companies over the years in the oil field and in farming. In 1999, Tony won the Southeast Oilman of the Year award, and in 2009 he was inducted into the Oilman's Hall of Fame. 2 of Tony's proudest accomplishments was the building of a large bed truck for moving oil rigs called the Sow, which weighed 50,000 pounds. But he had to outdo that, and then he built a 90,000-pound bed truck called Gerda, and it was named after Gerda Munsinger of Spy fame in the 1960s, early 70s, because they were both internationals. Mr. Speaker, it was a pleasure to be able to attend, Mr. Speaker, and Tony, rest in peace.
Recognize the member for Regina Lakeview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my distinct pleasure to rise today and recognize a constituent of mine, Abby Ulmer. Abby was a recipient of the Lieutenant Governor's 2017 Protective Service Award. Abby has been counseling survivors of violence and sexual assault for almost 40 years, and she's the first civilian to win the Protective Services Award. The Saskatchewan Protective Services Medal is given to men and women who risk their own safety to serve and protect the people of Saskatchewan. The medal criteria was recently expanded to include workers in the victim services field. Mr. Speaker, Abby has served as an inspiration to many over the years. She's been a leader for women in our community and is no stranger to receiving much-deserved accolades. Many in our community have benefited from Abby's advocacy, wisdom, and drive to support victims and change culture and laws around sexual assault. Hundreds of volunteers have taken training from Abby, delivered with passion and with humor, in order to staff a 24-hour sexual assault line, including myself and the member from Douglas Park. I would like to call on all members in congratulating Abby Ulmer on receiving the 2017 Lieutenant Governor's Protective Services Medal, and I would like to sincerely thank her for all that she has done and continues to do in our community. Thank you, Abby.
As a member for Saskatoon University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have the opportunity to bring greetings on behalf of our government at the Saskatchewan Industrial and Mining Suppliers Association, or SIMSA, 2018 Annual General Meeting in Saskatoon. May 27th to June 2nd is Saskatchewan Mining Week, so it was fitting that the SIMSA members gathered in Saskatoon to discuss various initiatives that affect mining in our province. Just a day before the AGM, SIMSA announced the development of their Saskatchewan Supplier Database, which is an exciting partnership with great potential for this organization. As a member of the Board of Directors with SAS Builds, I have had the pleasure of working with innovative groups focusing on priorities for Saskatchewan industries such as SIMSA. Part of SAS Build's mandate is planning strategic infrastructure that supports Saskatchewan suppliers in the public procurement process. That work is led by the good folks on SAS Build's Priority Saskatchewan team, including the acting president and CEO, Ron Dedman, who also joined me in attending the AGM. Mr. Speaker, a significant part of Priority Saskatchewan's work is engaging with key stakeholders, such as SIMSA, who often provide our team with valuable feedback and advice. It was an honour to thank SIMSA on behalf of our government for sharing their advice, experience and suggestions to better improve public procurement in our province. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to join me in congratulating SIMSA on another successful AGM and for all their hard work and leadership in the past year. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Melfort.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in the House to mention those whose names may not be in lights, but for many of us and those who they serve, they're heroes. My wife and I have always held a special level of honour for the foster parents that we know. These are friends of ours who didn't wait for others to step up, but they saw children without a home and said, let's open our homes, let's open our hearts. Our Minister of Social Services and his Deputy Minister have a huge responsibility on their shoulders and are the lead in ensuring care for the most physically and emotionally vulnerable among us. Their Foster New Beginnings and Strengthening Family-Based Care initiative has resulted in bringing the current number of foster-approved homes to 500. These are great programs, but need a provincial team of families to step up if it's going to succeed. So I would like to recognize today some of my heroes: Steve and Julie Schmolley, Matt and Crystal Taves, Jason and Pam Kellington, Paul and Rose Dubois, are people from my town who all built new homes, renovated or bought new places to make room in their homes and already big hearts for those in need. Today I want to honour and thank them, Mr. Speaker, and also I happen to know that we have here with us in this House a member from Moose Jaw Wakama, as well as others with their families who've opened their hearts and opened their homes, Mr. Speaker. So please help me recognize these friends of ours for the work of love that they've done and continue to do for the people of our great province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member, the Lloyd Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in the House today to acknowledge an inspiring teacher and some very engaged students who are exploring and involved in a fantastic program running in a middle-year school in my constituency. E.S. Laird Middle School in Lloydminster has developed a unique and impressive eco class for their grade 9 students. Guided by their teacher, Sean Donald is helping students in this class develop life skills in agriculture and science, both of which are very important to the growth of our economy and developing young entrepreneurs for the future of Saskatchewan. Some examples of projects the class works on include building and working with garden boxes, building a hydroponic and aquaponic bay, establishing a honeybee observation hive, installing rain barrels, and creating several types of composting units. Mr. Speaker, because of the significant creation of this program, which has engaged the students of E.S. Laird Middle School, our local PV Mart chose to award them a PV Mart Agriculture Grant, which will help the program grow and expand into the future. This grant will provide $50,000 in funding over the next 3 years. Jess Sidlowski of PV Industries noted that the importance of local agriculture and food production, which this project emphasized, played a big role in the class winning this grant. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of this entire Assembly, I'd like to congratulate Sean Donald and all his students for winning the PV Mart Agriculture Grant and thank PV Mart for investing in this worthwhile local project. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Martensville-Warman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The spring session started just a few weeks ago, and it was a time for a renewal for all of us. Our new Premier took a seat on this in the chamber for the first time, as did the Leader of the Opposition. And on that very first day, the Leader of the Opposition stood in this chamber and stated that he wanted to do politics differently. So after 42 sitting days, how different is the opposition? Well, Mr. Speaker, they have yet to tell us how they would create jobs and grow our economy. Their only plan is the Leader's platform, which proposes $2.5 billion a year in new spending, with absolutely no plan to pay for it. Same old NDP. They continue to support the Justin Trudeau carbon tax being imposed on families and businesses in our province. In fact, their leader called our fight against the carbon tax a pointless crusade. Same old NDP. And they're back to their old tricks of drive-by smears, shoddy research, and making accusations with no facts to back them up. We've heard unfounded allegations, questions about secret meetings that never happened. They've made unfounded accusations of conflict of interest by members. And they've even accused Saskatchewan businesses of buying government contracts. Well, Mr. Speaker, if that's doing government differently, doing politics differently, we're just not interested. It's weak leadership, Mr. Speaker, and it's the same old NDP. Here, here.
Well, that's a good lead-in. Question period. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning we have learned about troubling developments south of the border that have the potential to do serious damage right here in Regina. The Trump administration has announced that it will be imposing tariffs on Canadian steel at midnight tonight. The United States is a very important customer for our steel exports, and these tariffs would have a serious negative impact on the Saskatchewan economy. We've been strongly urging the federal government to take action that would protect jobs of Saskatchewan steelworkers. Is the Premier engaged on this file, and what's his plan to address the damage these tariffs could do to Saskatchewan? Hear, hear, hear.
Recognize the Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for what is a very important question on behalf of the people of the province of Saskatchewan, and that is the announcement with the imposition of a steel tariff by the United States on our industry here in Saskatchewan, most notably, the industry in Canada, but most notably we're concerned as well with the industry here in the province of Saskatchewan. We're disappointed by this decision, obviously. I spoke with the Prime Minister yesterday on this topic precisely. I'll be heading to Washington next week to engage on all trade topics, but in particular as well the topic of steel and the steel tariff that has been announced here, Mr. Speaker, and we'll continue to advocate for the trade agreements that we need and require here to be successful in our economy in the province of Saskatchewan, trade agreements surrounding all of our export products, including our steel products, and we'll continue to advocate for those projects that use Saskatchewan steel, Mr. Speaker, such as Keystone, such as Trans Mountain, such as projects that utilize Saskatchewan resources that are sustainably produced as anywhere in the world.
Hear, hear. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
At the start of this spring session, the Premier's first in his new role, my first as Leader of the Opposition, I asked the Premier if there was any common ground on which we could work together. Although, of course, there were plenty of disagreements along the way, we did find a few patches of common ground here and there. We were very glad to see the government finally agree to a full repeal of Bill 40, a bill that opened us up to seeing our Crown corporations privatized. And we were glad to hear the government will be moving forward with a domestic violence strategy and a sexual assault strategy. We were glad to hear yesterday that the Sask Party's changed its position and will be updating our parental leave laws to bring them in line with federal changes. And we were glad to hear that the Premier has seen the light and now supports universal pharmacare in Canada. So my question for the Premier is, what's next? What other common cause do you see us finding common ground on in the coming months?
Hear, hear, hear. Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, again, I appreciate the question. With respect to the opportunity that we've had to come to agreement on a number of issues, most notably the strategies around domestic violence, Mr. Speaker, as well as sexual assault, the changes that were made to Bill 40, Mr. Speaker, and it seems to be a little bit of one party moving one direction. So I would ask the members opposite to come over and join us on a number of policy issues that are important to the people of the province, Mr. Speaker. People across the province, we can continue to align on these issues, and ones that we already do with the New Democrats, Mr. Speaker, such as the resource revenue sharing in the province of Saskatchewan being for all people in the province of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. But I would ask the members opposite to join us in advocating for the Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain Pipeline, Mr. Speaker, both in this House, outside this House, and across the province, to ensure that we can put that Canadian Saskatchewan steel into that project, Mr. Speaker, and continue to have the opportunities for not just our steel producers here in the province, but the advancement of our economy as well, Mr. Speaker. I'd ask the members opposite, all of the members opposite, to come over and stand with Saskatchewan people to ensure that we will not have the imposition of a federal carbon tax on our industry's jobs and families across this province, Mr. Speaker, as we can do much better with that, with the plan put forward by the Minister of Environment, the plan for prairie resilience, a plan that will actually have results, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the people of the nation of Canada.
Recognize Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Although we are glad that the government decided to adopt a few of our proposals, we've got a lot more that we'd like to see implemented. We'd love it if they'd reinstate the tens of millions of dollars they've cut from education and fully restore funding to our province's classrooms. We've called on them to scrap their cuts to the rental housing supplement and to job training programs and start making the smart investments that will stimulate the economy, that will create jobs in this difficult situation. We've also called for an increase to the shameful situation where we've got the lowest minimum wage in Canada. Let's get the situation where we don't have people working full-time and living in poverty, and we've asked to see this government commit to real action on reconciliation with First Nations and Métis people, with things like a suicide strategy and an apology on the 60 scoop. And we've called day after day for a full judicial inquiry into what went down at the GTH. Mr. Speaker, our team has plenty of ideas. We'd be more than happy to discuss how we can improve the lives of Saskatchewan people together. Does the Premier have any interest in taking up any of those ideas as well?
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we have a number of ideas as well, Mr. Speaker, and those ideas have come about through our engagement with people across the province of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker, engagement that after today, our MLAs on this side of the House will be out in their constituencies, Mr. Speaker, working with the people and conversing with the people in their constituencies to ensure that this government, their people's government in the province of Saskatchewan, has every opportunity to continue to represent our people in this province, Mr. Speaker, all of our people in this province on the issues that are important to them, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that we can continue to invest in our classrooms, Mr. Speaker, which I'd appreciate the members opposite acknowledging the investment directly into our classrooms across the province of Saskatchewan, to acknowledge the investment into health care, Mr. Speaker, the investment into reducing our surgery wait times here in the province of Saskatchewan, yes, by using private surgery clinics, Mr. Speaker, in the public system, to acknowledge the successes of these initiatives that have been put forward, the investment that has been put forward, Mr. Speaker, in the things that matter to the people across the province province of Saskatchewan will continue to engage with that throughout the summer with members across this side of the House heading out to our communities, Mr. Speaker, tomorrow.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier will forgive us if, when we see a cut of $54 million to education and we saw 7.5 put in back last year, if we're not doing backflips of joy, and neither are the teachers or students across the province. Mr. Speaker, yesterday we learned that after Bill Boyd left Cabinet, he made a phone call to one William Wang, a high-level civil servant in the Ministry of the Economy, just before Mr. Boyd traveled to China to promote his irrigation immigration investment scheme. Now, it's clear that Mr. Boyd and Mr. Wang have grown to know each other quite well during Mr. Boyd's time as Minister of the Economy. They traveled to China together, along with one Lori Pusher, on several occasions. But if Mr. Boyd and his business associates were using their connections in the civil service to advance Mr. Boyd's own business agenda in China as a private citizen, that would be a very serious conflict of interest. Yesterday, the minister said he's asked his deputy minister to investigate. Will the Premier commit to investigating all of Mr. Boyd's activities in China and to making the details of this investigation public?
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the two questions in there. I'll address the second one first, Mr. Speaker. But yesterday, or this week, there was legitimate questions that were raised regarding a member of our public service, Mr. Speaker, and we take these questions very seriously. My answer today is exactly the same as the answer yesterday, that the Minister of Trade and Export, Mr. Speaker, has advised his Deputy Minister to review these concerns, Mr. Speaker. These are very troubling for the government of Saskatchewan, and I would say that the public service has a very strong conflict of interest guidelines, and we expect that those guidelines will be adhered to, Mr. Speaker. And I do want to correct part of the Leader of the Opposition's question, Mr. Speaker, with respect to our education funding in this province and our commitment to our education sector in this province, Mr. Speaker, and our commitment to the students, our next generation that are in that sector, Mr. Speaker. Over the past 10 years, that education funding is up well over double, Mr. Speaker, up 164% in those years. There's 40 new schools across the province, Mr. Speaker. There's 800 more teachers working across the province, Mr. Speaker. The record of the government on this side, Mr. Speaker, in education has been strong. It's been strong because this is what the people of the province value, Mr. Speaker. We're going out tomorrow to continue to engage with the people on all files important to them, Mr. Speaker, including the education sector.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, yes, I expect they'll hear quite an earful as they're out talking to folks who are trying to teach in crumbling schools and overcrowded classrooms. Mr. Speaker, backdoor deals and relationships with uncertain motivations, like the one between Mr. Boyd and Mr. Wang, are the precise reason that the public is growing extremely wary of placing their trust in this government. We need to set a much higher bar as MLAs. People need to be able to put their trust in us as their representatives. But this never-ending list of infractions by Bill Boyd, someone Brad Wall referred to as the DNA of the Sask Party, these infractions undermine that trust that people should be able to have in the people working in this building. Mr. Speaker, if Mr. Boyd and his business associations made a profit out of their connections in the civil service, that is a very serious problem. Saskatchewan people deserve better than an internal investigation that doesn't report back to the public.
Right.
So I repeat my question, which we didn't get a clear answer on. Right. Will the Premier commit to investigating all of Bill Boyd's dealings in China, and will he commit to making the results of that investigation public so that we all know exactly what happened?
Hear, hear, hear.
Recognize the Premier.
Hear, hear. Mr. Speaker, as I said, the Minister of Export and Trade has asked his Deputy Minister to review this file, Mr. Speaker. There are public service standards that need to be met and will be met, Mr. Speaker, in this case and any other case in the public service. And the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to MLAs in this Assembly, we all report to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, Mr. Speaker, as we have, Mr. Speaker. We all report any of our interests to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, Mr. Speaker. In this particular case, I said the Minister of Trade and Export has advised that his Deputy Minister will review this file, Mr. Speaker. This is a very troubling incident for the government of Saskatchewan, and we will deal with it appropriately.
Hear, hear, hear.
Recognize the member for Regina Lakeview.
Mr. Speaker, we've spent much of this session discussing mental health, but we've yet to see concrete steps to help kids grappling with mental illness. While the minister points to pilots in the future, there are kids suffering in our schools today. After last year's $54 million cut, divisions around the province cut psychologists, cut counselling services, and reduced student supports. These were experts already working in our schools, supporting our kids. If the minister is serious about tackling mental health issues in our schools, he only needs to look to his budget and fully restore that $54 million cut that was taken out of classrooms. Will the minister and that premier do the right thing and fully restore funding to bring back these desperately needed supports in our kids' classrooms?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I answer that, I do need to make one comment. The Leader of the Opposition, when he was standing up asking a question about public education, talked about $7.5 million. What he failed to remember, Mr. Speaker, is that this government in this budget annualized that funding in this budget to $30 million, Mr. Speaker, a clear commitment of this government's responsibility and commitment to public funding of education, Mr. Speaker. And that includes mental health services, Mr. Speaker. Psychologists, psychiatrists, Mr. Speaker, these services are provided within our school system. We'll continue to support students, Mr. Speaker. We've talked on this side of the House about the projects that we're working on with the Minister of Health. And the Ministry of Health with respect to providing services in the classroom, looking at the Alberta model, Mr. Speaker, which has been presented to us. So, Mr. Speaker, the commitment that this government has made to public education is clear. We will continue to do that. We'll continue to have conversations with leaders in the educational community, Mr. Speaker, teachers, school board trustees, parents, administrators, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that we're doing the right thing for children in our classrooms.
Hear, hear.
Recognize the member for Regina Lakeview.
Mr. Speaker, I do sincerely hope that that minister and that premier and all members across the aisle do get out into those classrooms and really listen to what's going on in our classrooms. You talk to anyone on the front lines and they will tell you that wait lists for public or even private counselling are staggering. And school divisions like those in PA that used to have counsellors come into the schools had to cancel those contracts as a result of this government's cuts. Does the minister actually think that this is serving our kids at a time when school divisions are struggling to support kids who are dealing with bullying, dealing with suicide crises across the province? We should be doing all that we can, not sitting complacent. Will the minister commit today to developing a comprehensive and coordinated response that ensures that all Saskatchewan kids have access to timely and appropriate mental health supports?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, this government is always committed to sitting down and having conversations with leaders in the educational community, Mr. Speaker. The funding that we provide to school divisions is generally unconditional, Mr. Speaker. School boards have the decisions, have those opportunities to make the decisions in terms of where the resources are put in, Mr. Speaker. And as I've said before, $30 million in additional funding in this budget, Mr. Speaker, with a commitment to consider how the funding formula will be enhanced, Mr. Speaker, in years to come, Mr. Speaker. But here's the facts, Mr. Speaker. $30 million in funding provides for 400 counselors, psychologists, and social workers, 236 counselors, 70 psychologists, and 78 social workers, Mr. Speaker. A number of other programs which we support, Mr. Speaker, the Kids Helpline, anti-bullying resources and grants, Mr. Speaker. And we know how important bullying, anti-bullying procedures and processes are in our school divisions, Mr. Speaker. We had a legislative secretary report on that, Mr. Speaker, and we took action on that report, Mr. Speaker. And mental health first aid training, Mr. Speaker. It's a clear commitment that this government is committed to making sure that we serve the best interests of our children.
Recognize the member for Regina Rosemont.
Speaker, last week the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission released a report on access inequality for renters in receipt of public assistance. Mr. Speaker, the issue of system navigation came out loud and clear as a barrier for people to secure stable housing. The best experts on the needs of people who access social services are the service users themselves, Mr. Speaker, and clear solutions were offered by those very people. So I'll ask, will this government listen to the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission's report, review program application procedures to remove barriers, and create a housing navigator position dedicated to supporting people through processes to alleviate the real challenges on and limitations placed on people in need when trying to secure a home?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Human Rights Commissioner for the report that we received last week, and I'm glad that the members of the opposition have had time to read it. I've actually had time to go up and meet with the Human Rights Commissioner last Friday with my staff and meet with his staff specifically to talk about this report, Mr. Speaker. Some of the details that came out on the report were very favorable, Mr. Speaker. There are some landlords that are discriminating against people that are on social assistance. We need that to stop, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, what I want to talk about is specifically if there are some people that are having some disability within their lives, Mr. Speaker, that they have the opportunity to be able to find appropriate housing. What the member opposite is referencing, we already have that, Mr. Speaker. We have a home repair program that landlords can access, and what they will do, Mr. Speaker, is they will work with the adaptation to independence program, Mr. Speaker. We work on this on a case-by-case basis. We do not have one specific home, as we don't see one specific disability. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Regina Rosemont.
Speaker, it's clear right now that this minister and this government are failing to provide the supports that people need, and these are people that are the most vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, we've been fighting hard all session against this government's callous cuts to the most vulnerable, and we've heard this government's attempts time and time again to excuse their cuts. We've heard them try hard to somehow excuse their attack on hard-working families, on families on the margins, and people living with disabilities. But what we haven't heard, Mr. Speaker, are real answers or an understanding of the real impacts of the callous choices of their government. So I'll ask this Premier one more time, will he do the right thing and restore the rental housing supplement for the most vulnerable in our province before it causes devastation all across our province? Hear, hear. Hear.
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I love the opportunity to correct the record. Mr. Speaker, we haven't cancelled the rental housing supplement program. We have over $46 million. I have said this on my feet in the House. I have said it in committee. We're getting phone calls in our office because the opposition is going out there and fear-mongering with the province, Mr. Speaker. This is unacceptable. People are concerned about this. People that are on the existing rental housing supplement that are receiving, if their eligibility stays the same, Mr. Speaker, there are no changes. I would really wish that the opposition wouldn't fearmonger, Mr. Speaker. As far as what is in the disability files, Mr. Speaker, I'm very disappointed at the opposition. They stand up in this House and talk about people with disabilities. I don't see them at any of the events that my colleagues and I get to go to on a daily basis, Mr. Speaker. They were talking about it yesterday when the people were here on the transit. I didn't hear any questions and estimates the other day, Mr. Speaker. We go to these files. We talk to these people. Mr. Speaker, this is a flavor of the day for them. We work and live this file every day. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Riversdale.
Mr. Speaker, it is so hard to sit suffering in an emergency room for hours waiting to get the help you or your loved one needs. This is why we continue to hear often about these struggles from families and patients, and why it is so important to get it right. This government knows this, and that's why they promised zero emergency room waits by the end of last year. Well, they walked this promise back to a 60% reduction by 2019, and now the ministry's newest plan quietly revised this goal to 35%. Mr. Speaker, we are still nowhere near meeting even that goal. It's one thing to set bold targets, but it doesn't mean anything if it isn't paired with making the right investments and getting the job done. Why, 6 years after this government's promise, are things still getting worse?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, emergency wait times are obviously a very serious issue. This is not an issue that's unique to Saskatchewan. This is an issue that all provinces are grappling with. The Minister of Rural Remote Health and myself hear about this frequently at federal, provincial, territorial health ministers' conferences, Mr. Speaker. What we have done, Mr. Speaker, is we have increased acute care bed capacity in the largest hospitals, Mr. Speaker. We're looking at other options we can do. We've announced the accountable care units that we have 3 up and running in Regina, 1 in Saskatoon right now, Mr. Speaker. The early indications are that those look very optimistic for us, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as far as setting targets, Mr. Speaker, this government is about setting targets. We've done that many times. Unfortunately, this one we haven't met it. Unlike the members opposite, Mr. Speaker, when they were in government, who said that they didn't want to set targets, Mr. Speaker, because unfortunately they probably wouldn't meet them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. We're not afraid.
Recognize a member for Saskatoon Riversdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What this minister has is a moving target. Yes, there have been initiatives, but if we are still not getting these weights under control, the solution isn't to keep moving the goalpost. It's to make smart investments and do better. In Saskatoon, the largest centre in the province, Mr. Speaker, every weight measured has increased. Patients are waiting an average of 3 hours just to see a doctor, and it is taking nearly a full day to get an inpatient bed. We know that hallway medicine is still an everyday reality, and people continue to receive care in pods. Why would this government throw in the towel and move the goalpost instead of ramping up investment to start making progress on this serious issue?
Hear, hear.
Recognize Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, we do take this issue very seriously. I talked about the accountable care units. Since those have been established, the wait times for an inpatient bed at Pasqua have reduced by 35%. Wait times for an inpatient bed at St. Paul's have been reduced by 24%. We'll have 3 more of these units up and running by the end of the year, Mr. Speaker, 1 more at Pasqua and 2 more at St. Paul's. But Mr. Speaker, as I said, you know, the member opposite is criticizing us for not setting targets, Mr. Speaker, but we have set a number of targets that we've been very pleased that we have met, Mr. Speaker. 3,700 more nurses, 900 more doctors, hundreds, well, the member doesn't want to listen, Mr. Speaker, hundreds more long-term care workers, Mr. Speaker. We have much more work to do. We're very concerned about this issue, Mr. Speaker, but we're going to continue to work on it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Athabasca.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This is a government that had a $1 billion tax increase to the people of Saskatchewan last year. And today now, Mr. Speaker, we see that jobs are down. Oil production, while increasing in Alberta, flatlined in Saskatchewan. Wholesale trade increasing in western provinces, decreasing in Saskatchewan. Retail sales, same thing. Building permits down, new construction down, the continued agricultural transportation crisis. Mr. Speaker, there's no doubt Saskatchewan's economy is lagging behind with the Sask Party government in control. Mr. Speaker, I don't want spin and bluster from the minister. I want answers. What are you doing about the jobs that we're losing? What are you doing about the steel tariffs and Saskatchewan's flatlining economy? Can you do your job so people stop losing theirs? Mr. Speaker, the buck stops here.
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, there they are. There's all the questions that we were waiting for the other day in estimates. Right there, Mr. Speaker, from the northern member, the critic for the Ministry of Highways, Mr. Speaker. No questions and estimates the other day on education, Mr. Speaker. No questions about our $30 million investment into classrooms across the province, Mr. Speaker. No questions, Mr. Speaker, about the investment over the last 10 years in our advanced education system, Mr. Speaker. No question on the record budgets in highways, Mr. Speaker, across this province, Mr. Speaker. No questions on highways, the transportation network, to get our export products out of this province, Mr. Speaker. No question on one of the largest challenges we have in this province right now, Mr. Speaker, the imposition of a federal carbon tax, Mr. Speaker. No questions on behalf of the people of the province of Saskatchewan on how members on this side are going to stand with those people across the province and stand with their jobs and their families, Mr. Speaker. No question on corrections, Mr. Speaker. Some of the crime challenges that we've had and how this government is implementing the PRT to deal with those challenges, and no questions on ag and energy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll be off to Washington next week to advocate on behalf of the people of this province and the strong economy in this province, Mr. Speaker, and members on this House are heading back to their constituencies because they appreciate the opportunity to serve as the people's government in the province of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue to engage and represent them, Mr. Speaker, throughout this summer and into the future.
Well, there you have it. Order. Oh, apparently I'm just standing here on my own, but well, that was rather spirited, and thanks for that. Ministerial statements. Introduction of bills. Does any reports be standing in special committees? Orders of the day.
Written questions. Question number 307 asked by Ms. Chartier.
Recognize the Deputy Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to table the answers to questions 307 through 318.
Table 307 to 318. I recognize the Government House Leader.
To ask leave to make a motion dealing with the parliamentary calendar.
Government House Leader has requested leave. Is leave granted? Recognize Government House Leader.
I move that when this Assembly adjourn at the end of this sitting day in accordance with the parliamentary calendar, it shall stand adjourned until 10 a.m. on October 24th, 2018, unless earlier recalled by Mr. Speaker upon the request of the government, and if recalled, Mr. Speaker shall give each member 7 days clear notice, if possible, of such a date and time.
Hear, hear.
The Government House Leader has moved that when this Assembly adjourns at the end of this sitting day in accordance with the parliamentary calendar, it shall stand adjourned until 10 a.m. on October 24th, 2018, unless earlier recalled by Mr. Speaker upon the request of the government, and if recalled, Mr. Speaker shall give each member 7 days clear notice, if possible, of such date and time. Is the Assembly ready for the question? Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. Recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask leave to make some remarks on the session.
Government House Leader has asked to make some concluding comments about the session. Is leave granted? Recognize Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to stand up here. It's been a long session. I want to first thank the Premier for giving me confidence in the job, and I tried to do the best I could, and I hope he was satisfied. We've had three, basically myself. It's still a learning curve, which I learned a new rule today on the petition rule. I guess I didn't read the rule book end to end, like I've told some members I have. I won't say where that rule came from and who submitted it, but as yourself, Leader of the Opposition, our Premier, and yourself, we're all rookies, I guess, in this session. And I'll say everybody has did an excellent job. Yourself, Mr. Speaker, I've sat in that chair as Deputy Speaker, and I know how hard it can be because everything happens very fast and you have to make decisions right there. I will say that you wear that hat very well. You did a very good job. I'm impressed. And if you ask my members, as you know, you sat with me in caucus, I don't say that very often to members. I also want to the Opposition House Leader and their team. She's also new to this job, and she's kept me on her toes. She is very smart, and I've had to watch, work very well with her. She's one thing I will say: she's very respectful and very good to deal with. Their House leadership is We've had a few challenges, but I want to acknowledge to their House leadership team. One of them was dealing with the Humboldt tragedy. We worked together that day, your team and our team, as together. Politics were set aside so that the members and everybody that works in this House could send their condolences to the victims' families. I want to acknowledge my chief of staff, or my House research, Jared Cole, who's probably did most of the work. We work together as a team. In fact, I know what he's saying right now to the TV. He's saying, I did all the work. But he helped me through a lot of the rules and regulations and did a lot of the work. One of the things I will mention, the night the power went out, that was a challenge. We lost, I think, 5 hours of committee work. I think he spent two more hours on the phone trying to rearrange them hours, built them into the system. I want to thank ministers, members, committee chairs, and the opposition for working together so that we could accomplish that and get the work done. The members have put in long hours, but we also forget about the people that put in longer hours, the behind-the-scene people, the clerks who are here at 8 or before, and when then I turn around and I schedule a committee till 10:30 at night, the opposition critic will want to maybe ask a few more questions past 10:30. Committee chair allows that, which is fine, and then they have to do paperwork afterwards. They were here till 11 at night. They're back here before 8 the next morning if I happen to be in their office asking them questions. And it's just not the clerks that put in long hours and given us a lot of advice. They've walked us through, myself, through a lot of the situations, and I know I've been in their office lots, and I appreciate the advice and working very well with the clerks. But it's also Hansard, the video people. The one night when committee was sitting, I went down, I didn't realize where I was sitting. It's behind room 8. And they've got like about 15 monitors going at the same time. They're monitoring 2 different committees, different shots, working the mics along them lines. And we forget about we never see them people. But they're there, and they're putting in long hours. They've given up their nights where they'd sooner be at a baseball game with their kids, with their grandkids, because we're sitting here at night, and we think we are the only ones here that are working. It's not. It's all the people behind the scenes that make that happen, that allow us to do our job. And I want to thank them, because I don't think they're thanked enough. I also want to thank Michelle Lang, who works with Jared, who stands out faithfully every day at that door and hands each minister his script so they can get through second and third readings. Because I know if she missed a day, I'm pretty sure it would look like the Three Stooges in here a lot of days. But she faithfully makes sure everybody has their script and everybody is on cue. I want to thank her for that. She never missed a day. Security too. They also sit outside the rooms. They're sitting here. They're early in the morning, late at night. All the other the people that work in the cafeteria, that work in cleaning the building, that work all behind the scenes to make this a great building. Visitor services. This building is is a jewel of Saskatchewan, and it needs to be well maintained, well looked after, and that people that do are very proud of it, that work here in all aspects of it, right from everybody, from one end to the other. As House Leader, you start to realize the different aspects of jobs of people that you deal with that are working behind the scenes to make this a very good job. When somebody else does that, I'll just see another $20,000 mic gone. Sorry for that, Mr. Speaker. I also want to thank my CAs who, and this applies to each member on both sides of the House. While we're here working, they're back doing the work of the constituencies. They're the ones taking the calls, taking the meetings, setting things up, faxing us stuff, emailing us. They're on the phone. I want to give a thank to not only my CAs that allow me to work here, but each and every other CAs that do the work. I want to thank my my hired man, Kevin, and my nephew Cole, who ran the farm, so I allowed me to be here, so I could work every day. But it's been enjoyable as government House Leader because I have good people to work with on this side and on that side. And you know, and another ones are the media. You know, people forget about them, but they're here every day. You know, and they're doing their job. They you know, as all the different aspects have just been pointed out to me of the people, and I know that I will have forgotten somebody in this building, or some person, but from myself as a House Leader, it's been a pleasure working with the opposition. They did their job. You know, they were very capable at it, but they did it respectfully and they did it professionally. And our members and our ministers acted the same way, respectful, and did their job professionally. And that's what the people of Saskatchewan ask of us, to do our job and do it professionally. So again, myself as House Leader, I want to thank everybody for the work that made this session the way it was. Thank you.
Recognize the member for, recognize the opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join with the member opposite to make a few remarks, if that's okay. The government House Leader did a tremendous job of the thank yous that he's already provided, so I will make mine a bit more brief. As was mentioned, Mr. Speaker, by the government House Leader, there's a lot of folks here this session that are quite new in their roles. The two leaders, the government House Leader, and yourself and myself. So I have a lot of people to thank for teaching me and allowing me to grow in this role, and is frankly putting up with me while I learned through bumps along the road. The first folks I want to thank are the clerks for their wisdom and guidance in trying to make sure that I didn't step in too many potholes, including today, Mr. Speaker. I also didn't know that completion day you can't have petitions. So even as recently as today, I always thank them for their wisdom and their knowledge in trying to keep us on the right course. And as was mentioned by the government House Leader, I also want to thank the committee staff and the committee clerks for their hard work, again, in making sure that all of us don't step in too many potholes, and that we all do the work that we're supposed to be doing and actually get the actual procedural things that we need to do done correctly. And as had been mentioned, they work very long hours, you know, for the glory that they get as in those roles. So we thank them very much for frankly putting up with all of us and helping us do the work that we need to do. I also want to thank the Sergeant at Arms and his team for keeping us safe and keeping us going. Again, a group of folks who work long hours while we're sitting here. They're here too, doing the work that needs to be done to make sure that we're all here. I also want to thank the House Leader on the other side, the government House Leader. It's been a great opportunity to get to know him a bit better. I think we make an unlikely pair, but it's worked really well. He calls himself a rookie in the role, Mr. Speaker, but he has a wealth of experience both on the government side as well as the opposition side, and that's really helped that perspective has really helped this whole operation to run as smoothly as I feel it has. And I've had the opportunity to lean on him in his wisdom, and his perspective has been so great and much appreciated. You sort of, and I know that my colleague, the Deputy House Leader, talks about this often, that when you go through when you go through this, even though you're on different sides of the House, you get this sort of bond with each other because you're walking through a fire together, even though you're dealing with, you might be dealing with different colleagues and different issues. You really don't experience anything else like it, and it's really only the person who's opposite from you that understands what had to be done behind the scenes to make sure that we did our job. So very much I want to thank him for his work and his role. It's been a great opportunity. That also gives me the opportunity to thank my colleague sitting next to me, the deputy House Leader on my side. He's been a wisdom of knowledge, or a wealth of knowledge, a well of wisdom is what I've been saying lately. But also, ever since I became elected, Mr. Speaker, not just when I stepped into this role, he's taken me under his wing and has been a huge mentor to me, and is a large part of my growth as an MLA and as a legislator, Mr. Speaker. And lucky for me, he continues to put up with me and also provide some good humor along the way. He's a pretty awesome seatmate, Mr. Speaker, in especially during question period. So I very much want to thank him for what he's done. I also want to thank the Ledge Assembly staff and the building staff, the cleaners, our staff in the cafeteria, everybody that behind the scenes, everybody that's working in different ministries, as well as political staff, for all of the work that they do as well behind the scenes in keeping everything running and keeping us going smoothly. I want to thank the pages for their work this session. They've done an absolutely tremendous job. And I also want to thank you, Mr. Speaker. You've done a fantastic job stepping into a new role, and as you've learned, and as I've learned too, these roles you have to learn quickly. It's a sink or swim sort of scenario, and I think you've done a phenomenal job, Mr. Speaker. Not too much sinking at all, Mr. Speaker. You've done a fantastic job, and it's great to see you grow in this role as well, Mr. Speaker. I also want to thank Jarrett on government side. He's done a great job, and on my side I want to thank Melissa Bendig, who's already been mentioned, is moving on to work in Alberta. The two of them have been working really well together, and they help us, myself and the government House Leader, look better than we probably would look without their service and leadership. And they've worked really hard to make sure that we got done what we needed to get done, in particular when the power went out, Mr. Speaker, and the last minute scrambling that had to happen to make sure we got all our time in for estimates. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of back and forth, and it's actually a lot of accommodation of both sides to make sure that we get done what we need to do, and the folks out there don't necessarily see how often we all work together to make sure that we get done the government work that we need to get done. I also want to thank the constituency assistants and all of the folks that help support us when we're away, including our families. Mr. Speaker, they're an integral part to the work we do, frankly. I also want to thank Hansard for their work. Being here when debate is exciting, and being here when debate is not so exciting. They're always here, and they're always listening, and we always appreciate it. And as had been mentioned, I want to thank the media for their hard work. They also work long hours and have to deal with files that can sometimes be very difficult to deal with, and in particular what was mentioned by the government House Leader was the Humboldt tragedy. Often they're at the front lines of dealing with folks who are in tragic situations and seeing some pretty awful things, but have to do the work that they do, and I want to commend them for that work as well. I hope I haven't forgotten anybody. That was all I had on my list. I just want to thank everybody for all their work this session, and colleagues on this side of the House and on that side of the House for everything that was done. It can feel really feisty and really hot in here at times, Mr. Speaker, but we all are here to serve the role that we serve, and I think it's been done with honor and respect, Mr. Speaker. So thank you.
Hear, hear.
I think it's left with me. I'd like to request leave for my comments. Leave granted? I asked for it, yeah. But, again, I've got a few comments to make myself, and but thanks for the leave. But I would like to thank everybody for your hard work this session. You have both sides. You put in the time, you put in the effort, and I believe the people of this province are well served, and you should congratulate yourselves for that. But I believe people of this province are well served by your efforts. Again, your constituents should also be proud of your work. I'd like to thank everyone on your behalf and my behalf, for everybody that supports us. In my case, I'd like to thank Lisa. I wouldn't be able to do any of this without your support. But every single one of us has people behind us, and you all recognize them at different times. They deserve that. We wouldn't be here without them. I pondered about what I'd say in regards to what this role as Speaker has been like for the last 2.5 months, and sure, lots been made about the hat. Yeah, the hat, I get it, yeah, I was there. But I have learned a lot. I've made plenty of mistakes. I think we all have at different times, but I've noticed that especially on the House Leader side, they've given me some leeway, and we've worked together, and I'll get back to that. And I've wanted this place to be a place of honor, and to be better, and for all of us to be better. And I think we are. People of this province, these members, are here for the right reasons. And you need to know that. What have I learned? Trust this table. Trust the clerk's table. I've been tasked with moving apparently nimbly, well, not so nimbly, patiently, but they've given me nothing but guidance and wisdom. And knowing full well, when they turn around and they look at me, it's, yeah, get it together now. And I've learned from that, but thanks for subtly and not so subtly making sure that I stay on task. So Ken, Greg, Iris, and Kathy, you might be the best in the country, I have no idea, but you're amazing. And you deserve that. You might be. You deserve it. You're pretty darn good. My office staff, Sheila, Haley, and Stephen, thank you for your immeasurable patience when I ask, why do we do it like that? Am I supposed to do that? Regardless, you just nod your heads and you get me on task. Thank you. I'd also like to thank my CA, Christy. Thanks for your seamless transition into liaising with my office and making sure, again, that I've stayed on task. I've also learned a couple other things. This place can get loud, and members sure want to make sure that I understand the rules, and it's nice when you yell from both sides at the same time and you have slightly different opinions, and I hear nothing, but actually your personal interpretation of the rules are fascinating. In the future, thanks, but no thanks. I also now know that the terms request leave for extended introduction and while I'm on my feet are terms reserved for the space-time continuum and are based on a star date. You get enveloped into this weightless, timeless black hole while I'm on my feet, and whoops, out comes a Star Trek tricorder, and you just go off into some direction for as long as you want to talk. And I go, well, awesome, tricorders, yep. The pages. So, oh yeah, we're ready. Nanji Allison. Sherilyn Bisdell. Jessica Fallman, Paige McAlpin, Kaylin Moracity. You've done an amazing job, and Yeah, you have been awesome, and with that, it'll be one quick 1, 2, 3, go. Thanks for laughing at my jokes and not the Minister of Social Services, because he's not that funny. Again, House leaders, I'd like to again thank you. You've done an admirable job, and you've made this place better. And thanks for that, Mr. Premier, Leader of the Opposition. You've done really, really well this session. I commend you for not only the debate but keeping things respectful, and but you've done well. Both of you have done very well, and I think the people of this province again are well served. Hansard. Yeah, I don't know how many times you've looked and read whatever I might have said, and I said I think that's what I said, and we've changed it. But thank you for your efforts. It's a moving target in here. Legislative Assembly staff, Sergeant of Arms. Thank you, sir. I've enjoyed coming, walking behind you every single day. Thanks for your wisdom. Thanks for your efforts, and thanks for keeping this place exactly the way we want it, secure. Monique, House Services, building staff, thank you again for all of your efforts. We can't do this without you. And I'll leave it with the media. Thanks for everything that you've done. I'm not sure who's up there still, but and just so we're clear, the dress code stands. I look forward to your impassioned pleas. You're looking for pants leniency. We'll see. Pants leniency. Okay. But, well, pants leniency, eh? We'll continue with that. But I'll leave you with this. We represent all of our constituents. All of them. Every single one of them. Let's continue to serve. Thanks for everything. Enjoy your summers. Recognized, Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that this House do now adjourn.
Here, here.
Government House Leader has moved to that this House be now adjourned. The pledge of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried. This Assembly stands adjourned to the call of the Chair.